history of why gaming was attacked by the church.
Yeah. Generally speaking, the criticism of gaming began back in summer of '79 when James Dallas Egbert went missing at Michigan State University in East Lansing. What happened in that particular case is this was a young man who had entered college at the age of 16, so he was much younger than his compatriots. He was, I guess he discovered he was homosexual. He was gaming there, but the gaming group that he was in was really the only, not even peer group that he hung out with, but the only people that he really hung out with. Really smart young man, was able to pick up speed in the local chemistry labs. Thereby a popular young man. I understand that the dormitory that he was put into was the drug dorm. Now you have to understand, back in 1979, the degree to which homosexuality is visible today or even acceptable today was just non-existent back then. Well, James Dallas Egbert was unhappy. He decided to commit suicide. He left a map in his dorm room wall showing unconstructed areas down in the basement of the dorms, down in the steam tunnels where he had gone to die. And he went down in one of those rooms, he popped a bunch of pills, and he thought he was going to die. He woke up about 2 hours later and decided, hey, this dying thing, not really for me. Went into town and, from what I understand, ended up going to the home of a university staffer who was in the homosexual underground in East Lansing, or homosexual community. Really was put underground then. And basically crashed out on this guy's couch for 3 days as these drugs worked their way out of the system. Well, again, think about it. This is an underage 16-year-old young man who's now staying with a male authority figure. Minimum charges of statutory rape. And over that weekend, when he's gone missing, things blow up. So Dallas doesn't want to stay in school. They agree and ship him basically down the Mississippi River from house to house, friends driving him down. He gets down to Louisiana, and somehow this scrawny 16-year-old kid gets a job on an oil rig. All right, doing what there's no clear report on actually what he was doing. In the interim, his parents, dissatisfied with the level of campus police coverage, have hired hired Bill Deere. Bill Deere is a flamboyant Texas PI who I've actually met. I debated on a television show once. Fortunately, that episode never got aired. But I mean, the guy's larger than life. And he went up to East Lansing. He looked around. He produced lots of flyers. They got distributed. And a month later, when Dallas came off of the oil rig, someone said, "Hey, here's a flyer with your name on it." Dallas called Bill Deere. Bill Deere, being a fine detective, saw the phone was ringing, heard the phone was ringing, concluded someone was calling, answered the phone. Dallas says, "I hear you're looking for me." He says, "Yeah, look, I'll come get you. Your parents are worried." Bingo, that's the end of it. Bill Deere wrote a book called The Dungeon Master, and if you actually read the book, The Dungeon Master, and I quote from it in the polling report, which I'll mention in just a second, Dallas had no problem with gaming. Gaming had nothing to do with his apparent attempted suicide. But that, and now I will say this, Dallas did commit suicide. He committed suicide a year later. After he had been withdrawn from school, after he had been through a year with psychotherapy. No evidence that he did any gaming in that time whatsoever. And yet he still killed himself. So you have a depressed young man, and that certainly is a tragedy. And given the way his life was set up, I mean, he was one of these guys that was just behind the 8 ball no matter what was going on. But critics of games use the fact that he committed suicide, use the fact that he had been linked with games to say gaming makes you commit suicide. Now, the polling report, which you can find online, just Google my name and the polling report, P-U-L-L-I-N-G. For Pat Polling. You will find it on the net really, really easily. A couple people have done really nice HTML presentations of it, illustrations and stuff. I have not authorized any of those, mind you, but I haven't told them to take them down either because they look kind of cool. But basically, the polling report was written back in 1989, 1990, when Pat Polling, who had formed this group called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, had actually moved away from gaming criticism and was attempting to get the state legislature of Virginia to fund a police organization commission to look into claims of satanic survivors. And when you read the bill that was submitted, they said who was supposed to be on the committee that was going to be sponsored by this bill, and the one civilian member lists all of her qualifications. She was the only person who could have been chosen as that. It did everything but name her. And in conjunction with Iron Crown Enterprises and a law enforcement analyst in Virginia, who's a friend of mine, I prepared at his request the polling report, which basically went through and dealt with all the criticisms that she had of games and her methods and methodology and all of these things. And basically said, look, she's totally unreliable. The material she's presenting is absolutely wrong. Last thing that I want to leave you with before I turn it over to other people is simply this. I've investigated every freaking case you can get any evidence on, okay? There is no causal link between murder and games, period. I have engaged in personal correspondence with guys who've been accused of murdering people over games. One of the last people Sean Sellers spoke to before the state of Oklahoma put him to death was me. You know, he and I concluded a phone call half an hour before they killed him. That's a freaky experience you never want to go through. In terms of suicide, and that's the most vile charge that's leveled against games, and I just want to assure all of you, there is no basis for that linkage. The reason being is this: statistically, 1982 is the highest incidence of suicide for the 13 to 19 age demographic, and that was 12.1 per 100,000. A 12.1 per 100,000. At that point in time, both TSR and Pat Polling agreed that there were 4 million people playing Dungeons and Dragons in that year alone. So you do the math. If gamers were killing themselves at the rate of their peers, there would have been 480 suicides in that particular year. Moreover, suicide experts will tell you for every successful suicide, there are at least 6 attempts. So we would have had then thousands of attempts and 500 solid hits. Now, because in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of teen suicide, federal government and CDC commissioned studies. And 3 things that they decided, and this is really, really important, because this explains why gamers do not kill themselves at the rate that their peers do. 3 critical factors for teen suicide are: 1, the person has to be a loner. 2, they generally are a substance abuser. 3, they have poor problem-solving skills. Now, obviously, your girlfriend's broken up with you, you're heartbroken, but your solution to that is I'll put a gun in my mouth. Okay, not good problem-solving skills. And not an error that is generally recoverable from. But you think about it, okay, gamers tend not to be loners. Unless there's 26,000 loners here this weekend. Literally at Origins one year, I was being interviewed by someone from Pat Robertson's media conglomerate. Stringer was there. We're sitting in the middle of the dealer's hall. There's 5,000 people milling around, and she goes, "Now what's this about gamers being loners?" It's like, lady, what are you, nuts? So we have that. 2, they're not substance abusers. Okay? You're buying HeroClix, how can you afford something for $2? It's not going to be happening.
That's not even speak to Warren.
Oh, yeah. And third, and very important, gamers are engaged in a hobby that demand and hone problem-solving skills. So we automatically take ourselves out of that pool. Are there reports of gamers who committed suicide? You bet. And it's generally the standard trigger event. You know, parents have broken up a couple. Or the parents are breaking up, something like that. This sort of traumatic event that happens in every teen's life, and there are just some teens that can't live with that pain. Right? So there are gamers who have committed suicide. But again, no traction for causality whatsoever. Causality has never been proved in any case. Period. All right? So for anybody who's concerned, whatever objections there are, and look, this is the thing with the gaming industry. If people have religious objections to role-playing, that you don't want to use magic, that's fine. You know, and we're all down with that, that's cool. But that doesn't mean you don't play role-playing games. You've got science fiction games, you've got superhero games, you've got Star Wars, you've got all sorts of other things where you just don't have to deal with that. And we're all cool with it. So, but for all of you, don't be worried. You know, like I say, any of these claims you've heard, everybody says, well, when there's smoke, there's fire. Honest to God, I've searched for it. I would love to find one case. And that would make me feel much more comfortable if there were actually one case where we can say, okay, this time it happened.